How do we? All right. It's Alexander Lawrence, the Portable Infinite. We're back. This is the fifth interview of the year, and we're with Jon King of Gang of Four. Hello, John.
Hello.
And he is written. John has written, but we're here. There, he tours a lot. They've reformed the band. They're doing a big tour in May, and there's four European shows. Are there going to be more shows in Europe this summer? Maybe.
Yeah, we're after playing in Leeds and London and the UK. We're going to a couple of nights in Dublin, then in Galway, then Paris, then up in Brussels and Amsterdam, and then off through Germany up to Berlin and down through Austria
Okay.
into Italy, and then ending up in Greece.
Okay. So
Yeah.
John King, he's written a book, "To Hell with Poverty," a class act inside the Gang of Four. It comes out April 1st. It documents John King's story from a South London slum and impoverished working class background to international success as core musician, lyricist, writer, and producer in the legendary post-punk funk band Gang of Four. Okay, so uh, here's the book. But well, let me just make one comment. Like, because I was born in '64, and I was like, I think I was like 16 when the first Gang of Four record came out. But I had, been a fan of the Ramones, Patti Smith, and I bought the Sex Pistols and some records when they first came out. I was like 13 or something. But I didn't really see any of the. I read about punk rock bands for about a year or two before I actually saw them. So it seemed like a lot of the bands when I actually saw them, they were just kind of like angry Chuck Berry music or something. It wasn't really besides like the band Suicide, which was just like a weird experimental band. A lot of the bands were pretty conventional. I mean, they were just kind of like one band was like the New York Dolls, this band was like the Stooges, this band was like Iggy a little bit. And it wasn't until you get to that second generation, like bands like Gang of Four and Public Image and Gun Club and Birthday Party. Not only were they doing something different, they were the shows were exciting, because like I saw a lot of the bands and they would just stand there, and not only did they stand there, like New Order like turned their backs to the audience, it was like boring as hell shows and the first Gang of Four show I saw was really super. I was expecting to see a bunch of guys, because I had listened to entertainment for a year or so. I was expecting to see like kind of like four sad guys in trench coats or something, and but I mean, what can you make a comment on that, or like just about like the punk rock music just being kind of underwhelming in a way? I mean, it was good. It was like an improvement, but it uh the the later music was more was the later music like what they call post punk kind of stands up a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I think listening back to a lot of the punk rock music, particularly the British punk rock music of the mid 70s, it doesn't stand up well. I mean, all that at the time I really found Pretty Vacant by the Sex Pistols really thrilling. But actually it's just like slightly faster Black Sabbath. It's not got any musical innovation in it whatsoever. Um, and I think having from her bands like that, and it was so sort of generic, and it's all followed, of course, the standard dominant, subdominant, tonic chord progressions, which, as you mentioned about Chuck Berry, I mean, Chuck was the Chuck and Little Richard, invented rock and roll, and that format was so glisteningly perfect, and so particularly, I think British punk rock was very unadventurous. I mean, I was inspired to be in a band by going to New York. And my heroes were American bands, and so when I've was there in '76, staying in St Mark's Place with our friend Mary Harron, who had just broken up with JD Doherty, the drummer of the then unknown Patti Smith group. And across the street lived William Burroughs, and round the corner lived Debbie Harry, and there was the jazz club where Ornette Coleman and Miles Davis would play, and the like, and of course CBGBs. And so bands like Television at that time were really, I mean, really musicianship was was a big thing. The big difference, I think, between American, what came to be called American punk rock, and British punk rock was the sheer level of musicianship. And but it was quite clever, like Richard Hell and the Voidoids. I mean, Richard Hell invented the look. Um, but the you mentioned suicide. There was not much innovation going on. There was still quite conventional chords in there at that time. Uh, and I think what happens, almost the better you get as a musician, sometimes it's quite dangerous because you know how to do things and your hands go automatically to the dominant, subdominant, tonic chord progressions, and because that's what you've learned. And uh, uh, the great pleasure for me, as a writer and a co-writer with Andy Gill, was, of course, he didn't have any traditional guitar skills. He actually couldn't play guitar very well at all. I mean, in conventional terms, he couldn't play 12 bars to save his life. He couldn't play lead guitar at all. He couldn't play funk guitar at all, and he didn't know how to jam.
I think
But,
well, I think
but
he tried to play with Peter Murphy like in the 90s, and it was just a disaster because
oh, yeah.
he can hit a E chord and that was about it.
Yeah, that's right, because he had no traditional guitar skills whatsoever, and could. However, what he did have was this brilliant, innovative way of of exploiting his lack of nous. Of course, he would never practice, and he didn't work at the guitar. So I mean, he didn't make any effort to acquire those skills. But so what he did was he focused on a new way of playing the guitar that didn't require it, and I thought that was, and I always loved what he did. And so the trying to write music with someone at your heart who actually isn't really a traditional musician. I mean, in the way, for example, Dave Allen, our bass player, he'd been in a show band, he'd been in a cover band, he could play anything from the Meters to Can, and he could flip from one of those songs into playing a country and western song. It was in his DNA that he could zip around. So if you said, "Oh, let's play it more funky," he'd start popping the bass strings, and he'd say, "Can you dial it back a bit and play it a bit more, a bit cooler?" And then he would start stroking the strings, and so, and of course, Hugo was played drums, like Charlie Watts, like Simon Kirke, Free, and so what we could do was then start using this foundation stuff and our collective love of funk and reggae to do something else. And at the time, what I didn't like about music was it didn't have any funk in it. It didn't have any flavor to it. And the only phrase that I found I sort of warmed to when people were describing what we did and others was when people called it punk funk. And I, because I felt there was like a musical apartheid at that time, especially on American radio. They did, or think of MTV. It was Michael Jackson, I think, was the first non-Caucasian star who got maximum rotation on MTV, and we got played a lot on black and Mexican radio, and even though we weren't a funk band at all, we weren't like the average white band. And I think though that if you try to be true to your enthusiasms, and my enthusiasm spanned, you know, black AC/DC to funkadelic. If you've got that span of stuff, but you want to do something that's not genre based, like if you want to say, I don't want to play, even though I revere Chuck Berry, I don't want to play rock and roll like Chuck Berry. because he's already done it. He's already done Rock and Roll by Chuck Berry. Like who can out Chuck Chuck? And likewise, you don't want to sound like a version of uh, of, of Bob Marley or something, So you
Mm.
have to find you have to find your own way. And so uh, yeah, and so like we did things where I'd say, well, we're going to do a song where we're not going to have any key changes. I mean, you think a song like Damaged Goods hasn't got any key changes in it. It's got dropouts. Anthrax has no key changes whatsoever, and it never stops from the rhythm section. But it allows this other stuff to go by, and of course, it becomes, and then performing. Like you, I was bored by shoegazing acts. I mean, I think you pay whatever it is to get in, and I used to see it bands every single week. I mean, we were monstering because we got in free for places. I mean, I saw every single band that came through Leeds, which was the number one city in the country really for seeing bands, and got in, saw absolutely everybody. And when you start watching and observing, and you mentioned like the Stooges. I mean, you see them. I mean, Iggy was like amazing. It was like a masterclass of how to own the stage, and you really pay attention about how he owned the stage. And I remember R.E.M. was our support band for like a year and a half, and I remember Michael was very shy at the time, and I don't like giving advice because it's pretty not unhelpful, but I was saying to him, we were talking about Jim, I mean Iggy, and I said the thing about him is he's like a dog or a wolf, and he walks around the edge of the stage and he pisses around the edge of his territory. I said that's what I do, and you got to piss around the edge of your territory and own the stage, and I always knew that we were doing it right. Is when me and Andy would go to the front of the stage. Sometimes people would back away from us because it was just like because of this thing. You think now we're in the zone. You're like a sort of pump.
Well, let
Yeah.
me pick it up there. I mean, yeah, I mean, so I almost saw the gig with when you played with Iggy at Santa Monica Civic.
Oh yeah,
I almost went to that, but I didn't actually see it till Songs of the Free and 82, and Sarah Lee was in the band, and
yeah, yeah.
I was at Reseda, the country club in Reseda. I think you played there a couple times.
Excellent. Yeah, that's good, good,
And,
good, good.
and we just showed up. It was like sold out. We showed up. We were standing outside. I think well, I'm trying to remember. No, I think it was in the summer, so it was. I wasn't like freezing out there, but we were like hanging out, me and a couple friends, and like right before you went on, they just sold a couple extra tickets, to fill it
Yeah.
up, take your money, I guess, because they go, oh, they got five people hanging out here. So and
Yeah.
we were like right rushed into it, and we're going, and then you guys came on, and it was like it was a blistering show. It was like, I mean, what because I mean, besides the Cramps and a few others, I mean, there was nobody was really doing a show, and and
Yeah.
and really engaged. They were just standing there, and just kind of like, oh yeah, the Cure were okay, but they just stood there and played their
Yes.
songs
Yes.
and all that. And I was at that country club show. It was great, and then you guys came back to do the Us Festival, and I met you at Vinyl Solution, and here you got
Oh, 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 okay. All right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I got my record signed here by Sarah
By
Lee.
Hugo and Sarah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's this scribble right here is Andy Gill right here.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't think you were there though.
No, you can't see my signature, which people often say is not a signature because it's so simple. But
So like when I was at that, so I was one of the only people there. It was a real rainy day. You guys had just played Us Festival, I remember, and you guys out, it wasn't much of, we just played and wasn't really, it was kind
no,
of boring. And then I go, well, I saw that Hugo had bought some records, and he had bought like this Alan Freed compilation, and he bought Parliament Funkadelic. So,
yeah,
I immediately went and bought a bunch of George Clinton
Oh yeah, yeah,
P-Funk All-Stars records, right? Because I go, well, if Hugo Burnham is buying P-Funk and Parliament Funkadelic, I got to get some of those records too, because
yeah, yeah,
this is
yeah,
this is like hip. I mean, I was like expecting, something I hadn't heard of, and so I went, like by that time, and by '82, like there was a lot of Parliament Funkadelics were like remaindered, and you can get them for like a dollar or something.
yeah, yeah,
So you guys did Magic. I was at Magic Mountain. You played like two shows
yeah,
there, and I was there. And then you did when Hard came out. You did the Hollywood Palace, and then you came back a year later and did like a live album at the same
yeah,
place.
yeah,
And then there was a reunion in 2005 with, and then that's the first time I had met Dave Allen up in Portland at some festivals, but that was the first time I saw him play with you, and that was
yeah,
okay. And then there was you and Andy played, and I remember seeing you guys with Jesus and Mary Chain, but you guys played at like 5 o'clock or something. It was like,
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah,
and then the Andy Gill Gang of Four, uh, I mean, wasn't that great at the beginning, but they got kind of good at the end. I think it was just because
yeah.
they had just been playing for like 10 years, and they kind of gelled a little bit, and then I just seen you, and I thought you guys did really well at Cruel World, and I saw you at the Glass House too.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think really people at Cruel World were, were really taken aback. I think a lot of people that I know and were chatting with are going, oh yeah, Gang of Four was like really did really well. I mean, there's been a lot of Gang of Four. You guys have come over here. There's in America. There's been a lot of love for Gang of Four. Because I mean, you've come over here in a lot of different ways and stuff. And like I just want to mention, I mean, there's like the box set. I'm really impressed with
Yeah, yeah,
with that.
yeah.
It has like this record. Here's Entertainment, and it has Solid Gold, which is also here. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the box set. I mean, is it still available, or you have to buy it on? Is
No,
it sold out?
it was a strictly limited edition. I wanted it to be like a a collectible work of art, really. And so it was only ever made in North America. Sorry, in the United States, not North America, because the US uniquely has a law which is called the 35-year rule, which says that if you signed a contract in the United States, a recording contract, the law's assumption was that there was a disparity of power between the multi-billion-dollar corporation you're signing with and four hard-up musicians. And so anyone who signed a contract, who signs a contract in the US, has the opportunity by 35 years later to get out of the contract. Whereas all other contracts everywhere else in the world, and including America until this was passed, were in perpetuity, which, as you know, because you're a sophisticated man, in perpetuity is quite a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, and so and it only applied to the US. And because at the beginning we turned down any offer of a global record deal. I mean, CBS offered us tons of money to have a global record deal at the beginning, and others offered us very attractive terms. But we signed with EMI for much less than we've been offered up front because we wanted to have the United States as a separate entity. And so we signed with Warner Brothers in America. And that's why I was able, after 35 years, we, so long as the majority of the band members said we want to leave the original contract, you could do this stuff. I mean, as an example of how it worked, though, when we signed to Warner Brothers Records, the royalty that we got was 10%. In other words, you got $1 for a $10 album. I'm making that number up, but you got 10% royalty. And that was not unreasonable at the time because there'd be the vinyl had to be manufactured, it had to be packed, the sleeve had to be printed, it had to be stored, it had to be distributed, and there was breakages and all that kind of stuff. So a 10% royalty was not unreasonable. But fast forward 30 years from when we signed in America, this is the 45th anniversary of that, 95% of all the sales were digital. And there are no manufacturing, distribution, breakage costs whatsoever involved in digital distribution. So when we renegotiate a contract, having got out of the Warner's deal, our royalty is 50% on those things, which of course all acts should aspire to. All all acts. I mean, it's very hard being a musician as it is, but that was behind that. But what I wanted to do was because that was my baby, the box set. I wanted to make it to share what it was like to be in the band at that time. It's a bit like very like the motivation for me writing my book to say, what was it like to be in the band? And so treated it as a kind of scrapbook. And the other thing I wanted was my lyrics, because I wrote all the words, was I wanted there to be at least one authentic version of the lyrics that I actually wrote. Because right at the beginning, being quite lazy, I am of course a musician, and all musicians are lazy. I uh, I thought, well, all I'll do is I'll go onto one of these lyrics.com style sites and enter in my song titles and then paste them up, and that'll be an easy little job. When I first started the book within that box set, and I found that the lyrics were absolutely rubbish. They were, I mean, must have been done on some early, AI device. I mean, thank goodness we didn't have the rise of the robots then. We'd all definitely be toast if they could turn my simple lyrics into nonsense. And and then and then within it, the entertainment, Solid Gold, the singles, the double album never before released of us live at the American Indian Center in San Francisco, are all on Virgin 180 gram stuff. And I was really pleased, to be nominated for a Grammy for it because and I only lost to George Harrison, and I was or the George Harrison estate. So I was really pleased with that because those songs mean a lot. I mean, on the tour that we're going to do, we're going to play the whole of Entertainment track by track, and then have a little break, and then we're going to play Best of the Rest for a second set. We play two sets, and it's a real trip to play that first album because some of the songs that almost never played. I mean, like and songs that are really really relevant now, like Guns Before Butter. It's quite hard to play live, and that is really it feels really fresh. Unfortunately, all this talk of blood and iron is the cause of all my shaking. The fatherland's no place to die for. I feel it doesn't surprise me too much that so many young people are Gang of Four fans. Because I wish it wasn't, but it seems to be talking about today.
Yeah, it's relevant again. I mean, but I mean, in the earlier days, I mean, there was like the whole kind of nuclear scare
Yeah.
element and stuff, and I guess, and that was kind of like,
Which
like,
has all come back again. The
hmm,
only 3 weeks ago, the Polish government is lobbying
all
the
right.
government to place nuclear weapons on their site, and the in the Ukraine war, they're trying to get the British and French to to guarantee their independence without nuclear weapons, which would be
Well,
unhelpful.
the Ukraine used to have like nuclear weapons, and then they gave it up with
The
assurance
Russians and
from a
Americans.
Russia. Yeah, the Russians said we're not going to attack you. Don't worry. We got
And
it.
both Russians and Americans said, "Don't worry, you're fine." And then now they're buddies. The Russians and Americans are buddies, and
Oh, I'm not. I'm not. But I always hated the Russians. I mean, I
yeah,
didn't.
so did I. I mean, the defining thing about what was when I was starting off with the so-called New Left was we all hated Eastern European communism, and it was really really bad for ordinary people, that system they had in the Soviet Union, and it's pretty bad now.
What about publishing? I mean, I asked since I interview a lot of bands that started in the '80s. I mean, I always ask about publishing. I mean, since we already saw the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, and they like Led Zeppelin. I watched that documentary. They Jimmy Page financed the first Led Zeppelin record, and they basically licensed it to Atlantic or wherever they went. And then same thing with the Rolling Stones. They lost all their early publishing, all the '60s records, and then when they in the '70s they started their own label, or they would license it to. It seemed like bands should keep their publishing, and they should be able to license it to another label, and they can do the manufacturing. I mean, there's a lot of bands right now that are like trying to get their rights back to their early stuff. I mean, Gang of Four kind of was a precedent because you guys went to court to get those first two records
Well,
back.
we didn't go. No, we didn't go to court. No, but
Oh,
what? All you had to do in America was fill in a form.
okay.
Uh,
Yeah, but you had a lawyer though. You hired a lawyer
oh
to.
yeah, a friend of a friend was a lawyer, and he said, you know, there's this thing that exists in America, and you can get all your it, all of your recording rights back, the recorded works back. And we said, oh yeah. And I thought, oh, that's going to cost a fortune. She said, don't worry, I'll do it for nothing. And we said, well, that's going to take up a lot of your time. He said, no, it does. It's just filling in a form. And so we just said he sent over the electronic form, which we filled in, and he filed it. And he said it was about 2 hours work. And but it only applies after 35 years. It is a remarkable piece of legislation, and that's why the box set was never available anywhere except in the United States, because the rest of the world we were signed to EMI in perpetuity. So 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 uh, so forever and ever and ever, uh, our stuff is owned by EMI, and so a way of trying to get around that was we re-recorded around 2005 some of our favourite songs as close as possible to the original, but that was ours, and that was
Yeah,
an album called Return the Gift.
right. Yeah,
And I have to say, downstream, that is what has inspired Taylor Swift,
right.
because we were the first band to do that. We said, because we can't get our recorded copyrights back at all in the rest of the world. Let's re-record them to sound as close as possible, and that's what other people have done after us. And I like to think that Taylor Swift was inspired by Gang of Four.
I hope so. Maybe maybe we'll see it on the next record. So there's this book,
Mm.
the Red Sad Jim
Oh
Dooley.
yeah, yeah.
How is your book different from this book?
Well, Red Set is a history book.
Yeah.
Mine is a memoir of my life. So there's no similarity at all between them, really. I uh, my it's the story of my life from I was born into a very poor family, living in a slum, with no heating and no inside toilet and no bathroom and no money and in a all that stuff. A bit like a Monty Python sketch, really. And I had to plan a bomb site when I was a kid, and all of these things, and the story of my teens. I was from a poor working class family, but I got a scholarship to a very posh English private school,
Oh,
uh, and that's where I met Andy Gill, who became my partner in Gang of Four, but also at the same school in my class, there was my group was Kevin Lysett, Mark White, and Tom Greenhalgh, who were three of the Mekons. Paul Greengrass, the later director of the Bourne Conspiracy movies, and the documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis. So we're all in this little tight little group of friends together, and then it's a story of me going to Leeds, which was then a decaying, falling apart once industrial city, a bit like Detroit was for a while. Absolutely. A third of the adult population were out of work. The buildings were all falling down and all that stuff, and that's where we started the band. So I haven't actually read Jim Dooley's book, but I know that it's a very authoritative historical account of what went on. I don't. These are The Hell with Poverty is full of short stories about uh, how it was and what it was like to be in the band, and like I'll describe. Coming off stage in Amsterdam, and we meet the head of the Amsterdam chapter of the Hells Angels, and his sergeant with a Bowie knife and a mirror of drugs, and his trainee prospects, and then me and Andy go up for a training day with the Hells Angels. That sort of thing. Uh, uh, Me and Andy hitchhiking to Spain through France, and going to New York and all this stuff. So I don't think there's any, apart from the fact that I feature, I suppose, in that book. I suppose I must be in it as it's about Gang of Four. But these are stories that no one has ever heard before, except my unfortunate friends who probably heard them too often.
And it seems like a lot of the chapters end abruptly, like with about some kind of place you played, or and then it's like, okay, that building's not there anymore. And
Yeah,
everybody, and like people like Ruth Polanski, she died in a terrible car accident and stuff
yeah.
like that.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like the thing is, as you said at the beginning, and I think you were right, that things have to try and describe what it was like to people who our audience is very young. I mean, when I say very young, I mean like most of our audience are under the age of 35. So the idea, for example, of being in a world where no one had a telephone, where you couldn't use a credit card to pay a long distance call. No one I knew had a television set. I grew up in a household with no record player. We didn't have pop radio at all. Um, no one I knew had a car, um, uh, and it was a mixture of what it was like for everybody and poverty. And so to try and then looking at it back, looking at from now to then, the places that I knew, and certainly you will have known, so many of them have been destroyed by corporate America. The Tropicana in Los Angeles, which was the Valhalla of rock and roll. Led Zeppelin were there. The Stooges recorded Funhouse round the corner in Electra. Andy Warhol and Paul Morrissey recorded the movie Heat round the CD pool where everyone used to get laid. It was. You turn up at the Trop, and I remember me and Hugo just bumping into Debbie Harry and Chris Stein in the Duke's coffee shop. Where is it now? 8585 Santa Monica Boulevard is a Ramada Inn. Where we recorded entertainment, the workhouse on the Old Kent Road in London, in a deprived area of southeastern London. What's happened to that? It burnt down. All of our masters were destroyed, and now a supermarket is on its site. You know, so you sort of Emerald City we played in Philadelphia, demolished, and so you see that came without thinking about it. But I kept writing and I'm thinking it was great when we were playing at Hurrah in New York, and Ruth Polsky rather. Ruth Polsky was uh, the greatest booker in New York, and she was killed by a taxi running her down while she was waiting in line to get into a gig. You know, it it was so there was a side to this which is blackly funny. I mean, blackly funny and also sad. And I when I described when I was 5 years old and I went to primary school, there was such certainty that we'd be killed in a nuclear war that we were all being trained on duck and cover exercises, which happened all across the Western world, which is to get under a desk and cover your eyes when the mushroom cloud happened there. That was our best advice. It's a good thing to do, by the way. Bear that in mind. Lie down, cover your eyes, and uh, the sign for diving under your desk was a siren. It went "Roo!" And the people that were told to do the siren were responsible people, like the people running a local bar. I mean, I don't know why they were considered to be responsible, or post office managers, but that was all abandoned in the 1980s, which I thought was funny because of double glazing. They said because of double glazing, you wouldn't hear the siren that gave you 4 minutes warning that you're going to be blitzed by an H bomb from Moscow. So these things are quite funny, but at the time, uh, that's what we all went through. Uh,
Yeah, I did a duck and cover. I
oh,
did that in the 70s. I did
yeah, good for good. And the other thing I used to do in hotels in big cities, I always used to ask to see the fallout shelter, uh, and they always told me to get lost. But they all had it was mandatory, wasn't it? All the big hotels and had fallout shelters in the basement. Did you ever go in any of them?
no. I've been in a fallout shelter, but not, I didn't realize they had them in hotels. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, there are loads of them. Yeah, no. But they would never let you in because they would always say, "Oh, I don't know where the key is. I think the manager's got it." And I said, "What if the Russians attack in the next 20 minutes?"
but I think in America there was I think there was maybe in the 50s or 60s there was people were trying to sell fallout shelters and put in your backyard so you can be
Yeah,
safe from the
yeah.
atomic blast. But well, I'd like to talk to you all day, but I mean, people out there, read the book "To Hell with Poverty" by Jon King. Buy 5 copies for the whole family. Uh, Go see them. Go see Gang of Four. They're starting like April 30th. They're rehearsing right now for you guys. They're getting it right. They're getting the songs right. The April to and most of May, they're going to be in America. It's the farewell tour. They got
That's
Ted
it.
Leo and Gail on bass, Gail Greenwood on bass, and buy the records. Here's entertainment. Maybe the greatest record of all time. Who knows? You know, we got
Yeah.
Solid Gold.
Oh man, you got yeah, that's fantastic.
There's Songs of the Free, and Hard is. I got like a single here, like too. Like look at this.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well,
Check
that's
out those
nice.
clothes.
Oh look. Oh man.
What happened to that shirt?
It was quite a nice shirt, but I think I was lent it.
What's going
Not.
on here? It looks like it's the Thompson
Uh,
twins here. What's going on? Okay,
I
forget that
hate.
stuff.
I hate that cover more than I hate anything.
Okay, I got for some reason I have 2 copies of it. But
Yeah.
where should people go if they want to contact you? Like Gang of Four.
Well, just come to the shows. At every show, I'm going to be coming out front after the show to sign the book, and I'm also going to come to the merch stand. So every single show, I'm going to be outside, and will Hugo and Gail and Ted. We're all going to come out the front. We just want to say meet as many fans as we can after the shows.
Okay.
Say goodbye. So that's
And,
what they should do. Buy a
and
ticket,
the
and
best
we'll.
way to find out about Gang of Four is the Instagram, right?
Yeah, and there's also the Gang of Four website. Yeah, which is yeah, we got.
Okay, so that shop is going to be that's legit merch. It's
Oh
not
yeah,
like
yeah.
some bootleg.
Not some knockoff. However, you
I thought
can't.
I thought this was like from you guys. I thought it
Well,
was
I did. That's my design, but someone's just printed the T-shirt. It's
okay.
okay.
Okay, I'm gonna
You're allowed. You're allowed to wear it.
I'll write an angry letter to them wherever I got it.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
find out.
Send them. Say you're disgusted,
I thought
and
it was COVID. It was like COVID. It was 2020. I thought I had like a short time to live. So
put three exclamation marks on it and in caps, and that will really frighten them.
okay, it's been
All
a
right. That's it.
it's been a pleasure to finally talk to you, John. I'll see you at the Fonda or wherever, or maybe Pepe and Harriet's. We'll figure out. I mean, make some time for me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All you got to do is. I will see you after the show.
Okay, great.
All right.
Okay,
Take
thank
care
you.
then.
Bye.
Thank you. See ya.